I wonder if I should just leave this up here while people come in. Okay. All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining. Today, we're going to talk about maximizing your real estate value through the clean energy grid. But before we get started, wanted to talk through just a little bit of housekeeping items. You see on your screen there, just a graphic showing the control panel for GoToMeeting there on the right. Today, we'll be doing this in webinar format, so the presentation is going to be mostly one way. So your audio and webcam should be defaulted to off. You see that in the top left corner. If any of those are green, feel free to shoot us a chat in the bottom there and let us know, and we'll work to turn that off for you. Adjust your audio settings there on the little audio drop down from phone to computer audio. And then finally, as we go through the presentation, we will be save time at the end for Q&A. So by all means, drop in a question there. And we'll also try to get to these real time as they come up during the presentation. So as you see something interesting, drop in a question and we'll get to you as soon as we can. My name is Bobby Howard. I work for Greenleaf Advisors based out of Chicago. And at Greenleaf, I lead our energy practice, advising sustainable companies that what we say are driving the world towards our clean energy future away from fossil fuels. And one of the key clients, one of our largest clients at Greenleaf, is a firm called Intelligent Generation, whose Vice President of Business Development, Marc Thrum, is my co-host today on this webinar. Marc, maybe I'll pass it to you if you want to say a little bit about your background and what you do with Intelligent Generation.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. And Bobby, thanks very much for having me on your show. Intelligent Generation is a Chicago-based company. We're a software as a service only company. And what we do is really the management of energy assets that would be owned by commercial and industrial customers, remote control them to participate in different markets, really with the objective of helping reduce your electrical bill and generate some fresh sources of income.
Bobby, can I just jump in for an admin point, just
Sure.
for people who are joining via the web link? Just for the questions bar, you'll see muted and then a hand raising, and then below that there will be a question mark that you can type in your questions. Just a little bit of a different format. Thanks.
Okay. Marc, was there anything else you wanted to add there? Sorry, I didn't know if Katie cut you off.
No, we'll go through it as we proceed.
Okay. So yeah, Greenleaf works very closely with IG, helping identify new business prospects and working with business owners, such as many of you on the call today, that are interested in clean energy. And we spend a lot of time talking with business owners and talking through what their energy goals are and why they might be interested in pursuing alternatives to their local utility for electricity needs. And the drivers for business owners are obviously varied. There's different motivations, everything from cutting costs to maybe altruistic reasons wanting to go green. But we've listed what we see commonly, most frequently on the slide here across the board. And usually it's a mix of all of these, but it's a diverse group. And historically, it was difficult to accomplish all of these by just going clean energy. You might be able to do one or two, but the good news is now there's a paradigm shift in the way that we produce and consume our electricity. And this provides quite a bit of opportunity not to address one or two or three of these things, but address all of them by getting a cleaner, more affordable energy source. So maybe to get into do a little deeper dive on how the grid's changing, Marc, maybe you want to take this one on a little bit.
Yes, so here we're talking to you on this call mostly on the assumption that, as Bobby said, you're a business owner, commercial, industrial, and that perhaps you've even been pitched solar power 5 years ago, and it didn't make a lot of sense, perhaps economically, perhaps technically, and you're here because you're curious and want to see if anything's changed. And yes, a lot has changed. We'll get into that. Before we do, let's take a quick step back to do something that is very summarized and reductive, which is in one picture here, the one you see, describe what we see the mega trend being on the electrical grid, not just in the United States. Here we say old world and new world, but it's really around the world also. So we come from a history where electricity was really a very top-down, top-to-bottom affair, with highly centralized, generally monopolistic entities that were generating, transmitting, distributing electricities to owners, residential, commercial, public, sort of top to bottom. And as we've seen over, let's say it started really 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, you've heard about things like net metering, injection, backfeeding, this type of language, where owners of distributed electrical resources, so often solar panel on your roof, even a windmill in some area, would actually be able to permit it and would be able to bring energy back to the grid. So we came from 100% top to bottom. Over the 10 years, there's been a little bit, and in California, a fair bit of bottom up going on. But where this is going really in the next, 10, 15 to 20 years, is we're going to see the advent pretty much of also bottom to bottom. When you have solar power on your roof and you generate more than you need for the next 10 minutes, sure, you can send it back to the grid, but really it would make a whole lot more sense to send it to your neighbors. And in fact, that's how the electrons flow today, because they follow the path of least resistance. And a lot of what we're seeing in the future is creating the fabric for this bottom to bottom sharing to happen in a more natural, automated way. It's a little bit it's been used and abused as an analogy, but it's the Internet of electricity. That's what we're seeing in the future. And so that might be all nice and good. You're here listening to this thinking, well, that's coming in the next 15, 20 years, and I'll wait until that happens, and then I'll see what it means to me. The reality is that nobody should wait for that to happen. It is something that is happening very organically through first movers and through pioneers who are actually taking action, seeing market opportunities, making things happen with technologies like intelligent generations, and making it happen in a way that it is actually not participating, but rather building a stepping stone in that new world. So how does it happen today? What does it mean to me, business owner? How can I be a first mover, participate into the grid of the future? What does it mean to my business today? So these technologies of the future, this grid of the future, is really enabled by a combination of good practices, but really also new technologies, both hardware and software, that make these things happen. PV, so solar panels, photovoltaic, has been quite known. We won't go too much into the details of this. The technology that is really advancing and that you hear a lot about is energy storage. Tesla, you see here a picture of Tesla. They're a big name in that industry. They're putting batteries not only in your cars, but also on the grid. And these are the types of technologies that can be brought together. PV with storage together can bring a lot of advantages to you in your industrial commercial site, so that you get benefits of that for yourself, for your electrical bill reduction. Get some fresh income in a manner that is meaningful to you today, but that in the grand scheme of things actually participates in creating that grid of the future. And as soon as regulatory boundaries allow you to share some of that with your neighbor. So how do we actually do that? What does it mean, and what does it mean to you? Intelligent Generation as a software company, and I forget if I said that we're not here on the call trying to sell batteries to you or to sell solar power to you. our vested interest is really in sharing a story so that we can explore opportunities with you. At the end of the call, we'll see, if you think you qualify for actually becoming one of those pioneers, then we'll have a conversation. We can size things up. But here, we are just a software company, more like the economic engine that has the technology, the patents, and the experience to making these things happen. So what are these things? They're really orchestrated around earn, save, protect. So what we do with energy assets you might get on your facility is earn revenue by letting us manage these assets in the wholesale market, save energy, and if you so desire, use those assets to actually protect you from outages. So let's take some examples from those, diving into it one by one. Let's start with the one on the left, revenues in the wholesale market. So the electrical markets, if you're in Chicago, for example, your distribution utility is ComEd, but ComEd itself participates in what is called a transmission organization, really the grid operator in the broadest sense. And they are tasked with really making sure that the grid is reliable and operating open markets so that the different participants can trade different services on the electrical market. That can be energy for tomorrow, it can be capacity for the next season, but it's also a service that's for stability of the grid, and one of them is called frequency regulation. Intelligent generation is a full member of PGM, which is the grid operator for the Chicago area. So we'll use the term PGM a lot today. So PGM has one of those markets, which is frequency regulation, and we can use a battery that you might have in your backyard to actually generate revenue for you. So here's how that works. Frequency regulation, Bob, if you can move one. What is frequency regulation without going into too much technical details? You see here a curve with a blue line that goes up in the morning, goes a little higher in the afternoon, and then back down at night. That is the typical load on the grid over the course of the day. And maybe you've seen that before, and it typically looks like a smooth blue line, but the real-time reality of this line is that it's actually moving up and down in microscopic and sometimes not so microscopic increments, every few seconds. And the stability of the cycles, the famous 60 cycles that you hear about, 50 cycles in Europe, the 60 hertz is the actual electrical unit, that varies very much with the exact balance of supply and demand on the electrical grid at every second. And batteries are a fantastic resource to help fine-tune that balance every second. And the frequency regulation market is nothing else than allowing us as a PGM member to use the battery that you might own to contribute to the stability of the electrical grid by every second, taking a little bit of power in and then a little bit of power out as the grid needs to contribute to its stability. It's a very lucrative market. Let's show you how it works, actually. I think we have perhaps one real-time, yeah, thank you. So here you have one of the monitoring of battery operations by intelligent generation through a platform that we call Power Ops. This is more internal, it's actually very simple, but what you see here on the top, without again boring you with too many technical details, you see a red line that goes up and down, and that is really for that particular zone and those batteries that are represented in this graph. This is what the grid is expecting from us. And we basically allocate, optimize, and dispatch that work to the batteries that are in our subscription basis, and we pass on that signal. We collect the response. All of that is monitored every second, aggregated every hour, and then the performance of that is computed every hour and escalated to a monthly level.
And Marc, just to emphasize or make a point to everyone on the line here, this is a real-time tool here. You can see the numbers kind of updating, and this is an actual asset out in the field connected to the grid, providing these services and getting compensated for it.
Yes, thank you. And this is not very pretty. It's more of an internal monitoring tool. You see lots of things with acronyms that don't make any sense. It's because it's normally not for you. This is more an internal tool. But you see that this works. It is by really following the ping pong ball that we receive from PGM that we're able to actually put your battery to good use for most of the time when you don't need it for anything else, and generate income for you. So how does it work is we put it into the market. Our performance is monitored by PGM. At the end of the month, PGM sends us a check for all the stability services that we've provided, and we pass that on to the owners of the battery. So presumably that would be you in that case, right? So that's real-time live frequency regulation here for a select number of the assets under our management. Let's go back to the
lots of different things that go into making sure the lights turn on in your house in the morning, and frequency regulation, keeping the grid at 60 hertz is just one of them. But it's an important one, and as a battery owner, it can be pretty lucrative, and that's sort of the point of all these lines here.
Yeah, so this is part of the, behind the scenes things that make the electrical grid one of the wonders that it is. We take it for granted because we plug something into the wall socket and it just works. But it's part of all the sometimes magical things that happen behind the scenes to make all of that work. So you can participate in that. And let's move on to another opportunity that makes this thing pencil for you today, and that's the saving bill. So that's not about earning revenue that we would send to you every month. This is about using those assets for yourself. And so there are two parts to it. Typically, let's just take the example of solar panel and a battery. There's a lot of talk about injecting back into the grid, of talk of net metering, but what it comes down to is that every time we've looked at it, the optimization of these assets is really maximized for you when you can use maximum advantage of those assets for yourself. If you can self-consume what you produce, you're going to have a good economic return. So the solar side, we don't need to talk about it too much. It's more familiar. It's also quite straightforward, right? You're consuming from the grid, let's just say 100. Now you have a solar system on your roof that will produce 10. So you use your own 10, and you only need from the grid the balance, which is 90, and therefore you're saving 10. That makes sense. It's rather simple, and that happens, of course, in daytime, not in nighttime. But that's the saving. That's relatively straightforward from the production of the solar. One thing that is a bit more sophisticated.
If you don't mind here, Marc, I'm going to throw you a little curveball and just flash this so folks can see, just to show, on the cost side, just how dramatic all of these different modules and equipment in clean energy has gone down. Just the cost of it, you can just see the chart there over the last few years, has just dropped very dramatically, and it's very firmly down and to the left, and that supports a lot of the cheap energy Marc was referencing there. But I'll go back, Marc, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. And what it really means is that if you're a business owner who in, let's say, 2016, 2017, thought that, oh, well, I did receive a proposal for solar power, and it didn't make a lot of sense. They were pitching to me that sunshine is free, and therefore it should be a great return on investment. Well, it wasn't. What's changed today? Well, one element is that these costs have gone down very, very dramatically. Also, that there are incentives like solar renewable energy credits that, depending on the jurisdiction, can come in play to actually sweeten the deal. So, throw out of the window the assumptions you had or the thoughts you had in 2016, 17 when you look at it. The time has really come to take a fresh look at it. You'll be surprised. But let me now talk about something that is a little bit more complicated, but as much an opportunity as solar power itself, which is the reduction, especially in the PJM territory, which is the broad Midwest and Chicago area and going east. It's what we call capacity and transmission charges. So these are line items on your bill. Often a little nebulous. Not many customers that we see understand those very intimately. And I will not try and give a doctoral dissertation here, but just explain at the highest level what this is about and really why there is only 5 hours of your own consumption in the year that can, in some cases, drive 30% of your annual cost. So trying to take control of that is a big deal. So capacity, and we'll just use the word capacity here. It functions a little bit the same way as transmission charges, the way it is built. So you may be familiar with demand charges, which is a payment about how many kilowatts you use, what is your maximum consumption every month, and it resets every month. This is also a kilowatt measure, but it works in a very different way. You see here on the bottom left a curve which represents the entire PGM generation and also consumption going back all the way to 2014. And you see the summer period here, that's the one in the middle that is higher, with 2 horizontal blue bars that correspond to the highest peaks in the year. So the 5 peak generation, that's really when the grid is under a lot of stress. That's when PGM needs to call everybody that has some spare resources available, even some dirty diesel generators, and call them and say, please come online right now. The grid needs a lot of power, we need you. So that's what they do to make sure that there is enough what they call capacity available on the market. But at the same time, if you're consuming a lot of power during those few hours in the year, then you're going to be paying a lot. And so here is this very interesting disproportion going on at work on your bill. How much, if you're in the ComEd, in the PGM territory, and you're on a rate of your utility that has line item capacity charges and transmission charges, again, I want to insist here, what it really means is that 5 hours of your consumption in the entire year, right? Not every day, just over the year, 5 hours will drive 30% of your total cost, because these are expensive line items, capacity and transmission. So what do we do? Using your battery and even your solar power and possibly even your generator, if you have a spare generator, to actually reduce your consumption during those hours? Well, it takes 2 things. One is a prediction. The grid doesn't tell us when it's stressed. Right? We have to find out ourselves. So we do it by really monitoring the grid. And that's sort of the left side here. But then here you see the result. About one customer of ours, Apt Electronics in Chicago, will show that a little later. And you can see here it's just a sample, 3 out of 5 hours for PGM that were the peak. You see that for these days, they had really the consumption that was going up, and you see a big rectangle where it dropped. Well, it corresponds to our accurate prediction of when the grid peak was going to take place, the maximum stress, and when we actually instructed the battery to go into discharge and made sure that all the assets were available to reduce your consumed load as much as possible. You can see that we dropped the consumption a lot, and we basically eliminated the capacity charge. This customer here is saving $120,000, $150,000 a year just in capacity and transmission charge reduction managed by intelligent generation. So these are a little bit more complicated line items, things to understand, but they really participate in the grid of the future, how utilities will bill you today and in the future, and why it makes sense for you to have some of these assets today and become part of that grid of the future. And, I'll be happy to take any questions on this. Maybe we have some.
Yeah, this is one of the more complicated parts, but just to kind of emphasize how special this is, this is something that the grid allocates these costs at the end of the year. They look back on how their region performed throughout all of the year, and they come back and they say it was these 5 hours where the grid was the most stressed. You as the consumer, what were you doing during those hours in July, for instance? Here's how much you're paying now for next year. And what IG does that is so unique is rather than wait until the end of the year and figure out what those costs are, they predict it. And you can see there, they hit the nail on the head with Apt here on how they had their project operate, and they deployed their battery. So Apt was actually consuming off the battery, not off the grid, when these events were going to happen, and that saved them bucket loads of money in the following year.
Yeah. So as part of our service, we provide both the prediction engine and then the dispatch to meet the resources with our prediction. Right. And then let's move on. And lastly, to one that is conceptually simple, is protect. Well, you can easily imagine that once you have solar power and the battery, you probably have all the ingredients you need to become autonomous in periods of grid outages. There are more and more outages on the grid, despite all of the investments being made. There are some pockets of improvement, but by and large, it's still a big area of concern for commercial and industrial operation. Now, we acknowledge that not everybody cares. There are a lot of operations out there where if the lights go out, well, you just wait until they come back and then you move on, and it was an inconvenience, but that's it. But there are a lot of industrial customers that we talk to who run operations that are not critical in the sense of life and death, like a hospital, but are critical in terms of their process operations. That might be true for in plastics injection molding, aluminum extrusion, food processing, or even customer-facing operations where there's a lot of showroom, shops, online operations with data centers and server farms. So you want assets that can generate income, that can generate savings of your bill. Once you have those, you can also spend a little bit more to configure them electrically in such a manner that it creates a microgrid. Microgrids are very fashionable. It's a fashionable buzzword right now. All it means is that in the event of the outage, you can disconnect yourself from the grid and use your asset as much as possible to remain autonomous and have continuity of operation. Now, it may not last for 12 hours, right? When the sun has finished shining and your battery is empty, then if it's really so critical that you need to go on at night, you might need a generator. But before even going there, most of the outages are less than half an hour. Most of them are less than a few seconds, actually. And keeping operations going for 80% of all those outages does not require a generator. And so you have this 80-20 rule where you can do a lot with these existing assets just by configuring them properly, right? So it's earn, save, protect. So with that, we've finished, let's say, the sort of theoretical portion of the presentation, the explanation of why does that make sense. Let's look at how it actually looks on the business case. And this is supposed to be a representative business case, perhaps, of what it might look like for you. Apt Electronics is a flagship retailer of white and brown goods in the Chicago area, one of the largest single-store appliance stores in the world, actually. Family-owned company with a long history of trying to be a community player. And several years ago, they really focused a lot on sustainability. It started, as usual, with energy savings, changing all the light bulbs, recycling everything, and then they wanted to take the next steps. The next steps had to do with putting solar power on the roof and then making sure they could also use those assets to protect their server farms. They ran apt.com from that building, and it was very important to protect themselves from about, on average, 3-4 outages of ComEd that they incur every year. And so they wanted the battery to do that, but at the same time, the battery had to produce revenue for most of the time that it's actually up and running and tied to the grid. So that's the idea that was their thinking. They met us, they met our solar partners who installed the solar. We provided them with an economic model that allows to do all of these things. And we'll show you how it pencils, but really they invested in this in 2016. It really started 2017. They claim and have a 5-year payback, and at today's cost, it would actually be less than that. Let's put some quick numbers on this. What you're looking at here is a 0.5 megawatt, so basically 500 kilowatts of solar power on the roof, matched with a 500 kilowatt battery. At today's cost, to give you a high-level order of magnitude, the capital investment for something like this, turnkey installed with all the transformers, pads, and all that, would take you somewhere around, $750,000 for the solar system, and the same amount for the battery. So really, you're looking here at the system that has a $1.5 million cost.
skipping ahead here, Mark, just to show this.
Similarly, yes, Bob is showing us, just like over the recent years, there's been a sinking price of solar panels. The same is true with energy storage. Everybody has a lithium-ion battery in your pocket, in your phone. More and more of us are going to drive a battery, if I can say that. And the same is true with energy storage. Tesla is actually one of the dominant players in not only EVs, but actually stationary energy storage, putting them on the grid, and you can do that at your facility, right? So the economics now pencil, and on a project like this, it really lands to about a $750,000 system.
And Mark, what percentage, just ballpark, of cost, capital expense of a project like this is the battery and the solar panel? 30%, 40%, something like that?
About half and half for a system that size.
About half and half.
It's, yeah.
So you can see, I mean, if half the cost is just these two items from 2015, 2016, the cost of these, 50% of the project has dropped significantly since APT.
Oh, the drop
in operations.
Maybe not 50% in terms of drop, but what matters right now is how much this would cost now.
Yeah.
And you know, this 500 kilowatt of PV, about $750,000 today, and same thing for the battery, actually, just as a sort of napkin numbers, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. And so what I want to show you here is now on the revenue and savings side, that this actually drives nowadays payback in the Chicago area that's between 2 and 3 years. It's really incredible. So what you're looking at here is a dashboard that we share with the customer that updates every day on the basis of the actual operation of the system, both the battery, the solar generation, the transmission capacity reduction. This is where all the value streams, which is the patent that IG holds, this is where everything comes together, both from a performance monitoring and an economic standpoint. This is a dashboard that we call the IG Power Watch, that shows that. Bobby, do you want to say a few words on this?
Hold up. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so this is what Apt Electronics sees when they come in the morning and check their console. This is a snapshot, obviously, but this is what they see, and they can view the different values that we discussed on the Earn, Save, Protect framework we presented earlier. So in the light green there, you can see how much they've saved on their transmission, and darker green on the capacity peak savings. Solar SREC, solar renewable energy credits, how much revenue they're earning on that on a monthly basis. And then the red is the offset solar energy from the cheap solar power. And then finally, the frequency regulation, maintaining that 60 hertz frequency with the grid and being compensated for it. And as you can see there, and depending on the month, that's a pretty good portion of that. And that's often cases while everyone's asleep, the battery's earning revenue for the business.
And let's also say a word about why these things vary, right? There's not an equal amount of sunshine every month. The value of the frequency regulation market is not the same every month, and the number of hours that we dispatch the battery into that market might change also. Here, for example, you see a blue line that says availability for the battery in the frequency regulation market, and you see in July that was less than 40%. Well, why? You know, we want to maximize. Well, yes, it was not in the frequency regulation market, but we used those assets to actually be available and contribute the maximum they could to actually reduce the capacity and the transmission peaks during those hours where we predicted it. And that's why it has helped create a high value for the green, which is the transmission and the capacity savings. So all these things are intertwined. It's really about a real-time optimization of the benefits driven by IG's optimization engine and making sure that it works in this way. But we're very transparent with the data that we generate, that we produce, and both in terms of kilowatts, so all the energy transaction, but it also reconciles every month to the penny to the dollars that are saved and earned. And any one business owner operator that would want to invest in a similar system to be part of that grid of the future, as I like to say, will have access to a similar dashboard, and we will be able to track very precisely the return on an investment and share that with customers and employees, right? This is not just about making money, $320,000 here in 1 year. This is about, with also other dashboards of solar generation, offset of greenhouse gases. This is about sharing that you're becoming a good steward of energy and really participating in the drive for becoming a more sustainable corporate citizen. So I think that ends it really here from a theoretical and business case study. We want to be able to replicate that many times over. And perhaps, Bobby, you want to invite some of our audience members to see if they basically qualify here to explore an opportunity.
Exactly. Yep. The title of the webinar is How to Optimize Your Real Estate Assets. And so we wanted to provide those in the audience a framework to try to gauge whether their facilities and real estate assets would be a good fit for solar and storage, and to capture some of the values we covered with the apt case study. So a few buckets here to consider with your facilities. The first is your load, what you're consuming and at any given time on the grid. And there is a threshold that supports the operation of the battery and optimizing all the economics of frequency regulation, for instance, and that's about 100 kilowatts. So if your facility produces 100 or consumes 100 kilowatts on average throughout the day, could be a good fit for a project like this. Second is space. Solar panels need space. Rooftops, great. If you have an open field by your facility, for instance, that can also be just as good. Third is what market you participate in. You see there on the right, that's a map of PJM, Regional Transmission Operator. ComEd there is in the top left, and the other blue area kind of goes out to the mid-Atlantic. And for a variety of reasons, the way the market's structured, if you're in PJM, great opportunity. Don't have to be. So if you have facilities in a different market called MISO, for instance, that sort of goes from Minnesota down towards Louisiana, that can also fit too, among others. But PJM is a great fit for sure. And then finally, tax benefits. These projects just come with very substantial tax credits. And so the larger your tax appetite, the greater the opportunity. And finally, I'll just close on these 4 things by just saying these are all directional. Neither of them are necessarily must-haves on all. It's just sort of to guide how you evaluate your own business without having to do too much work, hopefully. Marc, do you have anything else to add on these ones?
It just says here, I realize this now, market PJM, MISO best. PJM is actually a better market than MISO, but these 2 markets together are where the opportunity is, and intelligent generation can take you into, as you described, MISO, so it's all the way to the south here. We're actually the first company bringing energy storage devices into the customer-owned wholesale market.
Okay, yeah, excellent. And then finally, so if you've looked at these 4 criteria and in your mind you feel your business might be a strong candidate for a project like app that we described, IG and Greenleaf, we can analyze the opportunity very quickly. We can be precise and fast, as Marc likes to say. And IG has a lot of very powerful tools, such as the IG power plan there that you see a screenshot of, that can quickly review, just with a single utility bill, come up with comprehensive economics, payback period, overall what the full value of a project like this for your business would be. And you can walk away with at the very least a summary if you decide not to pursue it. But at the end of the day, as Marc mentioned at the beginning, neither IG nor Greenleaf are here to sell a project to anyone on the call. We identify the opportunity and then work with the business owner to make sure it's a good fit, and then identify who the right delivery team is to construct and build it for the business. Marc, anything else you want to add on this one?
Yeah, we're not trying to force this to anyone here. We know the value of time, and frankly, that includes not wasting our own. And So the reason we have these tools being fast and precise is in the beginning, as this transition to the grid of the future takes place, this might not be for everyone. And we'll be honest about it. If we think that your project is not a good fit, we don't want you to waste time, we don't want to waste our time, and we'll tell you. But we're not going to be dragging you through a 2-month process of exchanging information, drawings, and electrical bills, and all of this, just to tell you 2 months later that maybe it's not good for you. It will be, or it will not be very early on in the process. We'll be honest about it so that everybody can move on to do something else or to actually pursue this at a further level of details with people who can actually sell the equipment to you, which we don't do.
Okay. And finally, get in touch if interested. Marc and I can facilitate this and do a deeper dive and identify if this is the right fit for your business. Our contact information is right there. By all means, reach out to me. Marc's a busy guy, and we can get started for you and go from there and determine what the appropriate next steps are. This, as I mentioned, this will be distributed after the call. So if you don't have pen and paper handy, you can get my contact information after the webinar. But on that note, I think that wraps up our content for today. And I'll open the floor to any questions anyone may have about anything we covered or maybe something we missed. Marc, maybe while we wait, would we want to give just a little bonus time overview maybe of the grid outage for app, just kind of explain how that would work.
Sure, and let's remind everyone in the audience that any question can come either by raising the hand and asking the question orally or just typing into the chat box here. Yeah, this is a little further explanation about the backup function of these configurations. Keep it very simple here. Let's imagine you're on the situation where you're the facility here on top, and in every normal hour, you're here in ComEd, so that would be Chicago territory, your power is delivered to you by ComEd and has that line going up to the green section. Now there's a grid outage, and so you can no longer depend on ComEd. What would happen is there's an automatic transfer switch called ATS that opens up, and that creates what is called a microgrid. So now all of your facility, thanks to the presence of the solar panel, the battery system can operate autonomously. So here we just put some numbers in there. In fact, I just realized they actually don't compute, so we need to change those numbers. But here it says there are 808 kilowatts of critical load. So these are the loads that are provided by the battery in that instance. Here it says, well, it just happens that you would have 508 full production of kilowatts from the solar panel. So the balance that needs to be provided is 300, not 500. So we imagine here that there would be a 300 contribution from a battery discharge, and that's just how it works. And it is controlled by a microgrid controller, where the demand for power of the facility continues to be provided real time by the solar panel and the battery. And even in fact, if there is some excess, which can still happen, you can be in a moment where the critical load is less than what the solar is doing, then that goes back into the battery. So that's the notion of a microgrid in its simplest form.
Okay, thank you, Marc. Yeah, we'll update those values there. And everyone, thank you very much for joining the webinar today. We plan on doing a series of these, and we will get in touch in the future as the series progresses and we add more content and possibly other hosts on here that might be able to provide insight into different areas in this space. But again, thank you very much, and please get in touch if you have any further questions or would like us to explore an opportunity for your facilities.
All right. Thank you very much for having me, Bobby.
Thanks, Marc.